Poe's short stories. The Black Cat. Chapter 1. A descent into cruelty. I do not expect the reader to believe the tale which follows. It would be most unreasonable for me to ask anyone to believe what my own senses reject. Let me assure you that I am not crazy, nor am I dreaming. But tomorrow I die, and today I would lighten my soul. The events in this story may start off as commonplace, normal household events, but their results over the past few days have terrified me and tortured my very soul. I cannot explain these events. Perhaps someday a wiser person than I am will find a reasonable, practical, and perfectly natural explanation. But before I begin this tale of terror, I feel it is necessary to give some background of who I am and how these events came to be. Ever since I was a small child, those around me remarked that I had a calm and compassionate personality. My kindness was especially directed toward animals. I spent most of my time feeding and playing with animals. These were the happiest moments of my life. For me, this was not a mere childhood pastime that would fade away with adulthood. As a young man, my pets continued to be one of my greatest sources of happiness. I need not explain this feeling to anyone who has loved a pet dog. At an early age, I married a pretty young woman who had a similar personality as me. She also liked animals, and in no time we had a variety of pets in our house. There were birds, goldfish, rabbits, a small monkey, a fine dog, and a cat. The cat deserves special description here because it was an extraordinary feline. It was a large and beautiful animal, entirely covered in shiny, thick black fur. The most remarkable thing, however, was its intelligence. This cat appeared to be very wise and seemed to understand everything my wife and I did and everything we said. In fact, my wife sometimes said that the cat was actually a witch in disguise. Of course, it was just an old-fashioned superstition that witches sometimes changed into black cats. My wife was not being serious. The only reason I mention it here is because it was one of the things I remembered about the cat. His name was Pluto, and he was my favorite pet. I was the only one who fed him, and he always followed me around the house. When I went outside, it was difficult to prevent Pluto from following me onto the streets, where he would be in danger. We, my wife and our many pets, lived in peace and happiness for several years. Our situation changed because I fell into a bad habit. I don't need to explain how I began to drink or why at this time. It does not matter. It's enough to say that slowly, over the course of several months, I became an alcoholic. This, of course, greatly changed my personality. I slowly became more moody and more inconsiderate of the feelings of others. I started to call my wife ugly names. To my great shame and regret, I even began to hit her. My pets, of course, also suffered during this time. Not only did I neglect them, I also began to physically abuse them. The poor things did not understand the change in me. They would come up to me for affection, and I would kick them or push them away. Only Pluto escaped this mistreatment at the beginning of my alcoholism. I still loved him enough to stop myself from hurting him. This, however, came to a horrible end one terrible evening. I returned home after dark on this particular night very drunk. As I wandered about the house, I imagined that the cat was avoiding me. When I saw him, I grabbed him with both hands. He was frightened and bit me on the hand. He made a small cut on my hand, nothing really, but it enraged me. The alcohol in my veins turned me into a raging demon, and I lost any control of my former kind self. I held the squirming cat firmly with my left hand around its throat. With my other hand, I took a pocket knife from my coat and opened it. Then, in a moment that I am ashamed of to this day, I quickly drove the knife into the cat's eye and plucked it out. The next morning, I woke to a terrible hangover. In a rush, I remembered what I had done. Suddenly, many gut-wrenching feelings washed over me. I felt horror, remorse, and shame. But these feelings passed quickly, and I pushed them out of my mind. Soon, I gave in to the urge to drink again and tried to drown the memory of my misdeed in wine. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. It's true that without one of his eyes, he looked very scary, but after a while, he did not seem to be in pain. He went about the house as usual. But of course, he ran away from me in terror whenever we met. At first, I felt sorry to see that this creature who had once loved me was now afraid of me. But soon this feeling changed to one of irritation. Finally, I developed a sense of wickedness, a desire to inflict pain upon the cat. I have no excuse to explain this feeling. All I can say is that as surely as a man has a soul, wickedness resides in him. It is one of the basic elements of every human. I admit that this spirit of wickedness was my final undoing. It was this unexplainable desire of my soul to irritate itself, to do wrong for wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue and finally follow up on the injury I had caused to the unoffending cat's eye. One morning, without failing, I slipped a rope around the cat's neck and hung it from a limb of a tree outside my bedroom. I hung the cat with tears streaming from my eyes and with a bitter feeling of remorse in my heart. I hung that cat because I knew it had loved me and because I felt it had given me no reason to hurt it. Lastly, I hung the cat because I knew I was committing a sin, a deadly sin that would jeopardize my soul and place it beyond even the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. Chapter 2. The Second Black Cat. That night, I was aroused from sleep by the cry, "Fire!" The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was consumed by fire. With great difficulty, my wife, a servant, and myself escaped that inferno. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth had gone up in smoke, and I surrendered to despair. I do not believe in trying to seek explanations for disastrous events. I do not have that weakness where I must find the connection between cause and effect, between the disaster and the atrocious act that must have caused it. In this story, I am merely presenting a sequence of facts, and I do not wish to leave anything out. On the day after the fire, I visited the ruins of my house. The walls, all except one, had fallen in. The wall that was still standing had been near the middle of the house. My bed had rested against this wall. I guessed that because it had been recently plastered, it was able to resist the destructive force of the fire. Around this wall stood a thick crowd of people who seemed to be examining a portion of the wall with eagerness and rapt attention. I heard many of them utter words like strange and remarkable. These and other expressions aroused my curiosity. I went closer and saw, as if carved into the wall, the image of a gigantic cat. The accuracy of the image to real life was amazing. In the image, there was a rope around the cat's neck. When I first saw this ghost, for I could not regard it as anything less, I was overcome with wonder and terror. But after some time, reason came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden next to the house. When the fire broke out, a crowd of people had immediately gathered in this garden. One of these people must have cut the cat down and thrown him through the window of my bedroom in an effort to wake me up. When the other walls of the house fell in, they had compressed the victim of my cruelty into the freshly laid plaster. The chemical reactions caused by the flesh of the cat, the plaster, and the fire must have created the image as I saw it before me. Although my reason and my conscience readily accepted this explanation, the event still left a deep impression upon me. For months I could not stop thinking of the ghostly image of the cat. During this period, some of my old feelings about wanting the companionship of an animal came back to me. I began to look around the wretched places where I still spent my time drinking for another cat to replace the previous one. One night, as I sat drunk in an infamous bar, my attention was suddenly drawn to a black object on top of one of the barrels of rum, which were actually the main pieces of furniture in this room. I had been looking at the top of this barrel for several minutes already, and I was surprised I had not noticed this object before. I went over to it and touched it with my hand. To my surprise, the object was a black cat, a very large one. In fact, as large as Pluto had been. Upon closer inspection, I realized that this cat was identical to Pluto except for one thing. Pluto hadn't had a white hair on his whole body. This cat had a large splotch of white hair in no special design, almost entirely covering its breast. As soon as I touched him, he immediately stood up and purred loudly while rubbing against my hand. He appeared to be delighted with my attention. This, then, was the very creature I had been looking for. Immediately, I offered to purchase it from the bartender, but he said the cat wasn't his, nor had he ever seen it before. I continued to pet the cat, and when I was ready to go home, the cat seemed to want to go with me. I permitted it to follow me, occasionally stopping to pet it as we walked along. When we reached my new house, it made itself at home at once. My wife was happy to see it and soon fell in love with it. As for me, I soon found a dislike of the cat rising up in me. This was the exact opposite of what I had expected. I cannot explain it, but at seeing how fond the cat was of me made me disgusted and annoyed. Slowly, this disgust and annoyance became bitterness and hatred toward the creature. I avoided this cat and found that a certain sense of shame and the memory of my former deed of cruelty prevented me from physically abusing it. I did not, for many weeks, hit or kick the animal. But gradually, very gradually, I came to utterly loathe it, and I would silently run away from its repulsive presence, as if running from some terrible disease. I am sure that my discovery of its missing eye on the morning after I brought it home added to my hatred of the beast. Just like Pluto, the cat was missing its left eye. This fact, however, only made my wife love the creature more. As I have said before, she shared the same kindness toward animals that had once made my personality remarkable. However, the more I tried to avoid the cat, the more it seemed to like me. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair or jump up to my knees, covering me with its hateful caresses. If I got up to walk, it would get between my feet and nearly trip me. When this happened, I longed to kill it with a blow. What stopped me from doing so was the memory of my former crime, but more importantly, I must confess, was the fact that I was deathly afraid of the beast. This fear was not exactly a dread of physical threat, but I cannot define it as anything else. I am almost ashamed to admit, even in this convict cell which I find myself, that the terror I felt from this cat had been made stronger by a strange circumstance. My wife had called my attention several times to that splotch of white hair on the cat's breast, the only distinguishing feature which marked it as different from the previous cat I had destroyed. If you, the reader, will remember, I previously described this mark as large, but in no special shape or design. However, as the days passed, by slow degrees, almost impossible to notice, the white splotch began to take a distinct shape. It now started to resemble an object which I shuddered to think about, and for this, above all, I loathed, dreaded, and would have gotten rid of the monstrous beast if I dared. The object of my loathing resembled nothing other than the gallows, that mournful and terrible engine of horror and of crime and of agony and death. Chapter 3. A Cry from the Grave. Now I was indeed more wretched than the worst human alive, and to add to my woe was the fact that a lowly beast, of the same type I so contemptuously destroyed, would cause so much insufferable pain on me. Poor me! I could not find peace during the day, nor could I sleep at night. During the day, the creature would not leave me alone for a minute, and during the night, I would suddenly be jerked awake to find the hot breath of the beast upon my face and its vast weight upon my chest. The monster was a nightmare come alive, a force that I was powerless to shake off, a weight that was forever pressing upon my heart. Under such pressure as this, the last remaining good in me surrendered. My mind was filled with evil thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper in those days increased in degree to a hatred of all things and of all mankind. My wife became the usual and quietly suffering victim of the uncontrollable outbursts of my temper. One day, my wife came with me upon some household errand into the cellar of the old building which our poverty forces us to inhabit. The cat, of course, followed me down the steep stairs and nearly tripped me, which would have made me fall headfirst into the cellar. In a fit of rage, I lost all reason. I grabbed an axe that lay nearby and lifted it up high over my head, forgetting the childish fear which had prevented me from harming the cat before. I aimed a blow at the animal, which would have killed it instantly had I hit it. But my blow was stopped by the hand of my wife, who wished to save the cat. This drove me into a rage that possessed me like a demon. I shook off her grip, raised the axe again, and buried it into her skull. She fell dead upon the spot, without so much as a whimper. With this hideous murder done in an instant, reason returned to me immediately. I wasted no time in beginning to figure out where I could hide the body. I knew that I could not take the dead body out of the house, either by day or night, without risk of being seen by our neighbors. Many ideas entered my mind. I thought of cutting up the corpse into small pieces and destroying them by fire. Another idea was to dig a grave in the floor of the cellar and bury the body there. I also thought of throwing the body into the backyard well, or putting it into a box like a piece of merchandise and hiring someone to deliver it somewhere else. Finally, I came up with an idea that was the best so far. I would cover up the body in the walls of the cellar as the monks in the Middle Ages did with their victims. The cellar in which I contemplated this vile deed was well suited for this purpose. Its walls were not very well constructed and had lately been plastered over with a rough plaster. The dampness of the room had prevented this plaster from becoming hard. In addition, there was a projection of the wall caused by a false chimney, which had been covered up. I was sure I could tear the wall down, put the body inside, replace bricks and mortar, and plaster so that no one would be the wiser. My confidence in my ability proved correct. I had no difficulty removing the bricks with a crowbar, and in a few minutes, I put the body of my long-suffering wife into the crevice. I propped it upright and with little trouble replaced the bricks. I went out to purchase mortar, sand, and tools. Very carefully, I prepared some plaster that looked exactly like the other plaster on the other walls of the cellar. This was very carefully put on top of my recent brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that it was a good job. The wall did not look at all as if it had been disturbed. I picked up the trash from my efforts with care. I looked around in triumph and said to myself, "Here at least my labor has not been in vain." My next task was to look for the beast which had caused all of this horror, for I had, while engaged in my labor, firmly decided to put it to death. Had I been able to find it at the moment, there would be no doubt of its destruction. However, it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at my previous violence, and it was smart enough not to appear while I was in a destructive mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the deep, blissful sense of relief which blossomed in my heart at the absence of the hated creature. It did not appear on my chest as usual during the night, and therefore, for one night at least, since the cat had first come to this house, I slept soundly and peacefully. Yes, even with the burden of murder upon my soul. A second and third day passed, and still my tormentor did not appear. Once again, I breathed as a free man. The monster, in terror, had run away forever. I would never see it again. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my vile deed did not bother me much. A few people had asked about the whereabouts of my wife, and these questions were readily answered. A search had even been formed, but of course nothing was discovered. I was secure in my thoughts of a peaceful future. 4 days after I murdered my wife, a group of policemen came quite unexpectedly into the house and proceeded to make a very careful search. I felt no discomfort whatsoever, as I was confident in the effectiveness of my method of concealing the body. The police detectives asked me to come with them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. Finally, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. Not a muscle in my body trembled. My heart beat as calmly as that of one who innocently sleeps through a peaceful night. I calmly walked from one end of the cellar to the other. I folded my arms across my chest and casually strolled about. The police were finally completely satisfied that no foul play had been undertaken on my part. The glee in my heart strained to be released. An overwhelming desire rose from within me to say just one word to confirm my triumph and to make the police doubly sure of my innocence. "Gentlemen," I said finally, as they started to go up the stairs, "I am happy to have relieved you of your suspicions. I wish you all good health and that you pay me a little more courtesy in the future. By the way, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house." In my mad desire to say something easily, I scarcely paid attention to the words coming out of my mouth. "These walls, are you leaving, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together." And with these words, and through an overly inflated sense of bravery, I raised a stick in my hand, and with it, I pounded on the very wall behind which the corpse of my wife was hidden. May God shelter and save me from the devil. No sooner had the echo of my blows died into silence than they were answered by a voice from within the tomb behind the wall. At first, it was muffled and broken, like the crying of a child, and then it quickly rose in volume to one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly foreign and inhuman. A howl, a shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might rise only from hell, not only from the mouths of the souls that are damned there, but also from the throats of the demons that tortured these souls. I cannot describe what, if anything, I thought. I staggered against the opposite wall in horror. For one long moment, the group of police remained frozen on the stairs in terror and awe of the awful sound. In the next moment, they moved as one, and a dozen strong arms were pulling the wall apart. The bricks fell with a heavy sound. My wife's corpse, already greatly rotted and clotted with gore, stood before their eyes. Upon its head, with a red extended knob and a single eye of fire, sat the hideous beast who had caused me to murder and whose voice had condemned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up in the tomb,